"You will not sign it," the man said on the other side of the coach in the snow. "Sign it, and it is worth 11 shillings. Leave it blank, and it is worth 11 guineas. That is the whole of the arithmetic, and if you cannot follow it, you may go back to painting in signs." "It is her face," a woman's voice said. "She paid 2 shillings a week for a year." "She paid me 2 shillings a week. There is a difference, and the difference is the difference between us." The Duke of Quenholme could see nothing of either of them. The yard of the Bell at Halfworth was 6 inches deep in new snow, and full of steaming horses, and the mail was standing between him and the argument with its lamps lit at 4 in the afternoon, because the sky had come down like a lid. "Give it to me," the woman said. "When it is paid for." "Give it to me, Mr. Reeve. It is not yours to hold, and you know it is not." There was a scuffle of boots, a small hard sound like a bird hitting a window, and then the guard blew up and the coach lurched and went out under the arch. And by the time the Duke had walked round the back of it, there was nobody in the yard at all but an ostler and a dog. He would not have looked down if the dog had not been nosing at something. It was an oval case about the length of his thumb, tortoiseshell rimmed with brass, half trodden into the slush by a wheel. He picked it up and rubbed the wet off it with his glove, and the thing inside took the lamplight and gave it back. It was a portrait of an old woman. Not a flattering one. She had a face like a walnut and one eye lower than the other, and a crooked, wicked, entirely private smile. And somebody had painted her on a piece of ivory no bigger than a shilling, with such particular love, that Edmund Quenholme stood in a wet-in yard in his good coat for a full minute looking at a stranger's grandmother. "Whose is this?" he said to the ostler. "Couldn't say, sir." "There was a man and a woman here, arguing." "There's always a man and a woman here arguing, sir." He put it in his breast pocket, meaning to leave it with the innkeeper, and he did not leave it with the innkeeper, and he never afterwards could account for that. He rode home to Quenholme with it against his chest through 11 miles of falling snow. It would be 119 days, and 3 counties, and the loss of a great deal of his own good opinion of himself, before the Duke of Quenholme understood what he had picked out of that slush. That the smallest object in England had come into his hand by accident. That he would stand in a crowded exhibition room in the spring and hear a varnished knife scrape across his own brother's face, and learn in that moment exactly what his generosity was worth, and what it had cost a woman who had never asked him for a thing. He did not know any of it that night. That night he only held it up to a candle in his study at Quenholme and said aloud to nobody, "Who did this?" His housekeeper thought it was a servant's trinket, and should go to the poor box. His man Colby, who had been his groom for 19 years and had opinions about everything, said it was a shame to paint an old woman as ugly as that. "She is not ugly," said Edmund. "She is old. Nobody has painted an old woman as if she were worth the ivory since I was a boy." He took his glass to it, the little round glass he used for reading a horse's teeth and the small print of a lease, and he went over the thing an inch at a time, and there was no signature anywhere on the face of it, nor on the back plate, nor scratched into the brass. Then he turned the case over and worked his thumbnail under the rim, the way a man opens the back of a watch, and the pad came out a disc of card and blue silk, and on the inside of the brass rim, so small that he had to take it to the window in the morning light to be sure, somebody had scratched a hair. 3 strokes, 2 ears aback, a curl for the haunch, a hair sitting up. Edmund Quenholme sat down on the arm of a chair in his own study, with his heart going like a boy's, because he had seen that hair before. He had seen it once, 10 years ago, on the inside rim of another case, on a March morning when he was 29, and had gone up to his brother's room to say a thing he had not managed to say. Jasper had been standing at the window with his coat half on. Jasper had put a small oval case into his hand and said, laughing, "There. Now you may look at me and be as sour as you like, and I shan't hear a word of it." And Edmund had said something clever and cold, because he had been very good at clever and cold at 29, and Jasper had gone down the stairs 2 at a time, and that was the last of him. The case had come back to Quenholme in a packet with a watch and a letter, and a bill for 2 shillings. It had lived since then in a travelling box in the bottom drawer of the desk, and Edmund had opened it perhaps 4 times in 10 years, always alone, always with the door locked, because a man does not do that where he can be seen. He got it out now. He turned it in his fingers a long while before he could make himself look at it. Jasper, aged 23, in a green room, in a coat that did not fit him yet, painted so exactly that you could see he had been laughing about a minute before, and would be laughing again in a minute. Nobody had ever caught his brother's face like that. The 2 great portraits in the long gallery, the ones the family paid 100 guineas apiece for, had caught a young man with the correct number of features. Edmund had asked once years ago who had painted it. He had been told, a fellow in Barrowfield, Reeve and Son of the Market Place. He worked his thumbnail under the rim. The pad came out. The brass showed. And there, scratched in the metal in a hand so light it was almost only a rumor, was a hair sitting up, and beside it 2 letters and a date. He put the 2 cases side by side on the desk. The old woman with the crooked smile. His brother in the green room, 10 years dead. The same hand had made both, and the hand was not called Reeve. And the woman in the inn yard at Halfworth had been trying to get one of them away from a man, who told her that signing her own name would cost him 10 guineas. "Colby," he said when he could speak, "how far is Barrowfield?" "3 counties, your grace, and every road in them under snow." "Then we had better start early." They started at 6 the next morning, and the horse went down twice on the hill out of Halfworth. And Edmund Quenholme, who had not troubled himself over anything in 10 years, but drains, dividends, and the correct depth of a covert, rode 3 counties in the worst week of the worst winter in 9 years to find out the name of a painter. He told himself it was about the old woman. He told himself, on the 2nd night, at an inn where the beds were damp and the beer was worse, that he merely wished to restore a piece of property to its owner and see a rogue disappointed, and that a man of his position had a duty in the matter. He was 39 years old, and he had never in his life told himself so many things in 1 week. On the 4th day the snow stopped, and Barrowfield came up out of the white in the valley below him, a market town with a church, a wool hall, a bridge with a hump in it, and somewhere in it a shop with 2 names on the fascia. Reeve and Son, miniature painters and dealers in pictures, established 1791. There was no sun. Edmund found that out within the hour, and it was the first of a great many things about Talbot Reeve that turned out to be a decoration rather than a fact. The shop smelled of size and varnish and coal. In the bow window, on a cloth of dark green velvet, lay 11 miniatures in a fan, and Edmund knew before he had taken his hat off that every one of them had come from the same hand. An old sea captain, a young mother in a straw bonnet, a boy with a harelip painted straight on, unhidden, undisguised, and somehow beautiful for it. "Your grace does me too much honor," said Talbot Reeve. He was a broad, pleasant, shining man of 50, with a fine head of gray hair and the manner of a bishop. "You know me," said Edmund. "I framed a thing for your father in '98, and I never forget a face, which is my trade." He laid his hand on the velvet. "Anything in the window, your grace, or I shall have new work in by Thursday." "Who painted them?" "I did. All of them. Every stroke, 40 years at it." Reeves smiled. "There is a knack, sir, and either a man has it or he has not." "This one," said Edmund, and put his finger on the boy with the harelip. 6 guineas, you said." "6, your grace, and cheap at it." He paid. He walked out into the marketplace, stood in the lee of the wool hall with the snow blowing off the roof, worked his thumbnail under the rim, and there it was. A hair, sitting up, scratched into the brass. Then he went back along the row to the casemaker 2 doors down, an old man with a bench under the window, and asked him who made the cases for Reeve and Son. "I do." "And the pictures inside them?" The old man went on turning a rim in his fingers. "That'll be Miss Hart," he said. "She's at Tibbet's in Sheep Lane, and I'll thank your grace not to say who told you, for he's a good customer, and I've a daughter to keep." Sheep Lane was narrow and clean and went uphill. The house had a scrubbed step and a brass knocker polished to a shine, and the door was opened by a spare, upright woman of 70 in a black gown, who looked at the middle of his chest and not at his face. "Yes, I am looking for Miss Hart. She is out with the milk. You may come in and you may wipe your boots twice, once on the scraper and once on the mat, for I shall know if you have not." She stepped back. "I am Ann Tibbet. I have been blind these 6 years, so you may stop arranging your face." He wiped his boots twice. The room was small, warm, and in perfect order. Every chair square to the wall, every cup on its own hook, a table with a green baize cloth, and by the window, on a deal board, a paint box no bigger than a snuff box with 24 colors in it worn down to slivers. "You're a gentleman," said Mrs. Tibbet, sitting down. "You've a heavy tread and you smell of a good horse, and you've not said one word about my eyes, which is more than the vicar can manage. What do you want with her?" "I found something in the snow at Halfworth." "The old woman at the toll house," she said at once. "Beatrix cried about that. Not in front of me, she went out to the yard, but the yard door has a squeak in it and I count." She folded her hands. "Sir, if you have come to be clever with her, go home. She has one of those already and he is quite enough." The door opened behind him, and a woman came in with a can of milk, in a man's coat much too big and a bonnet gone soft with weather, and stopped dead. Edmund Quenholme afterwards found he could not describe her face to Colby, which was absurd, since he had a memory good enough for 1,100 acres of hedges. He could say only that she had paint under 2 fingernails, and that she looked at him the way a man looks at a horse he is thinking of buying, not rudely, thoroughly. He took out the oval case and set it on the green baize cloth. Beatrix Hart put down the milk. She crossed the room and picked the thing up and turned it over, and her thumb went to the corner of the case where the brass was bent by a coach wheel, and she said, in an entirely level voice, "It is not broken. That is the main thing. It was in the yard of the bell. I know where it was. I was on my knees in it for a quarter of an hour after the coach went, and it was dark and I could not find it, and I have been sick about it for 4 days. She set it down. "Thank you, sir. I would ask what it cost you to bring it, but I have no money, so I had better not. It cost me 4 days and a horse's knees." "Then I am 4 days and a horse's knees in your debt, and that is worse." She untied her bonnet. "You had better tell me who you are." "Quenholme." She did not curtsy. She did not color. She simply put the bonnet on its hook and said, "Ah, then you will be the gentleman who bought the harelip boy this morning for 6 guineas. Word came up the hill before you did. I paid Reeve 6 guineas for a picture you painted. Yes. How much of it will you see? 11 shillings, said Beatrix Hart, when he is in a good humour, and 8 when he is not, and nothing at all until Lady Day, because I am within my articles. That was the first he heard of the articles, and it took her 4 minutes to lay the whole of it out, standing by the window with her hands in the pockets of the man's coat, in the flat voice of a woman who has explained a thing so often that it has worn smooth. Her father had been a coach painter who died of a fall. Her mother had put her at 15 to Talbot Reeve, and Reeve had drawn the articles himself. 14 years, board and instruction, all works executed during the term to be the property of the master, and a penal sum of £200 if the apprentice should leave, or take work, or exhibit, or sign, or teach, before the term was out. She was 27. There were 2 years and a month still to run. £200, said Edmund. £200, she agreed. I earn 11 shillings a picture, and I paint perhaps 40 a year, and I pay 9 shillings a week for this room and Mrs. Tibbet's, and the sum will not come out however you turn it about, which is precisely why he wrote it down. She shrugged. It is not cruelty, your grace, or not only. It is business. He has a hand that cannot draw a cat in a shop with his name on it, and I have a hand and no name at all, and the law is on his side of the counter. And the exhibition. The County Society hangs in the spring. I have subscribed to it for 11 years. The County Society requires that a work be proposed by a member. Members are gentlemen. Mr. Reeve is a member. Mr. Reeve is the secretary of the hanging committee. She almost smiled. I have been in that room, sir. I go every year. I stand in front of my own pictures with the crowd and listen to men explain to their wives how Mr. Reeve gets his flesh tones. Behind him, Mrs. Tibbet said, "Tell him the rest, girl." There is no rest. Tell him about the hair. Beatrix Hart was quiet for a moment. When I was 17, she said, I understood that nothing I made would ever have my name on the outside of it. So I began to put a mark on the inside of the case, under the pad, where the master never looks because the master never opens a case, he sells it. A hair. My father used to draw them for me on the coach doors, 3 strokes. She looked at him steadily. There are, at this day, 214 of them in England, your grace, and every one of them has a hair in it, and every one of them has another man's name on the bill. Edmund Quenholme did not tell her then that he owned 2. He did not tell her about the green room, or the coat that did not fit, or the drawer in his desk. He had opened that box in front of no living soul in 10 years, and he was not equal to it in a stranger's parlor on a Tuesday afternoon. And afterwards, he would have given a very great deal to have that quarter of an hour back. Instead, he said, "Put your bonnet on, Miss Hart. We are going down to the market-place." There were 4 customers in Reeve and Son, when the Duke of Quenholme came through the door with a woman in a man's coat walking behind him, and Talbot Reeve was across the shop with his hand out before the bell had stopped. Your Grace, twice in one day. I wish to commission a portrait, said Edmund. He did not lower his voice. He had been raised, whatever else he had been, to be heard at the far end of a covert. My own likeness, in miniature, and I will treat with the artist and with nobody else. Then you are treating with me, sir. I think not. Edmund laid the boy with the harelip on the counter, face up, and beside it the pad and the brass rim he had lifted out of it that morning in the shelter of the wool hall. He turned the rim so that the window light took the scratch. That is a hair, Mr. Reeve. It is on the inside of this case, and it is on the inside of every case in your window, and it was put there by a person who was not permitted to put it on the outside. So I will treat with the artist. Miss Hart, what do you charge? He watched her stand very still in the middle of the shop, with 4 strangers looking at her. 3 guineas, she said. Miss Hart is speaking out of turn. 3 guineas, she said again louder, and my name written on the back plate, not on the face. On the back where nobody has to see it who does not wish to. Be Hart and the year. Reeve laughed comfortably. Your Grace will understand that within her articles the young woman's work is. Her work is yours, yes. So you shall have the 3 guineas, Mr. Reeve. I am not proposing to rob you in your own shop. Edmund put the money on the counter in gold, 1 coin at a time, which took longer than it needed to and was meant to. And I shall have the picture, and it shall have her name on the back. If any part of that is disagreeable, say so now, in front of these ladies and gentlemen, and I shall take my custom to Haworth and say why. The shop was silent. One of the customers, a stout woman in a good pelisse, was watching Reeve's face with enormous interest. Nothing could be more agreeable, said Reeve. Outside in the marketplace, the sun had come out on the snow, and it hurt the eyes. Beatrix Hart walked 10 yards without saying anything at all. Then she said, "That was very fine, and I would rather you had not. You have your name on it." I have my name on 1 back plate and a master who was made small in his own shop in front of a woman who buys 12 pounds of frames a year. She stopped and faced him. Your Grace, when a great man does a small kindness in a small town, he rides away and the kindness stays behind and somebody has to live in the house with it. He cannot strike me. He does not need to. He can put me on color grinding for a month. He can stop the ivory. He can decline to renew Mrs. Tibbet's lease of the shop room she sublets, which is 4 shillings of her 9. There are 11 ways, and I know all of them by their first names. Then tell me what would have been better. She opened her mouth and shut it, and he saw with a satisfaction that shamed him a little, that she had not expected the question. Nobody has ever asked me that, she said. I am asking. Then ask me first, whatever it is, before you do it. She pushed her hands into the coat pockets. That is all. That is the whole of what I want from anybody. Ask me first. Miss Hart, said Edmund Quenholme, I will ask you first. He believed it when he said it. That was the trouble. He entirely believed it. He sat to her 6 times in February, in the parlor in Sheep Lane, on a hard chair by the window, for 2 hours at a time. He had sat for a portrait once before, at 22, to a fashionable man in London, who talked the whole while about the prince, and painted him with a chin he did not possess. Beatrix Hart did not talk. For the first hour she did not speak at all beyond turn a little to the light, thank you, and he found that after 20 minutes of being looked at with that much attention, a man begins to say things simply to fill the room. He told her about the drainage on the low farms. He told her about his father. In the 4th sitting, out of nowhere, at 3:30 on a wet afternoon with the fire spitting, he told her that he had a brother once, and that the last thing he said to him had been clever. Her brush did not stop. Where is he now? He died abroad, 10 years ago in March. And do you have a likeness? Say it, he thought. Say, I have a small oval case in the bottom drawer of my desk, and I have opened it 4 times in 10 years, and there is a hair inside it. There are 2 in the gallery, he said, 100 guineas apiece. Neither of them is him. They never are, said Beatrix. 100 guineas buys a nose. Mrs. Tibbet in the corner said, You are talking to make her hurry, your Grace, and she does not hurry. I am talking because she will not. She is looking. There is a difference, and it is the difference that costs 6 guineas in the marketplace. The old woman's fingers went on with her knitting. Sir, May I ask you a thing plainly, since I cannot see your face and must go by your voice? Ask. Are you courting her? The room went very quiet. Beatrix Hart said, Mrs. Tibbet, in a voice like a door shutting. I am 70, said Mrs. Tibbet, and blind, and I have the right to be a nuisance. It is nearly the only right I have kept. Well, sir. Edmund Quenholme sat on a hard chair with the light on the left side of his face, and understood, with perfect clarity, and about 4 months too late, that he was. I am sitting for a portrait, he said. Said Mrs. Tibbet, and went on knitting, and Beatrix said, Turn a little to the light, if you please. And the sitting went on for another 40 minutes, and neither of them said one word. At the 6th sitting, she turned the board round. He had expected to be flattered, and had made up his mind not to mind it. What was on the ivory was a man of 39 with gray in his hair, and a hard mouth, and a line between his brows that had been put there by 10 years of doing his duty and nothing else. A man who looked as though he were listening to something in the next room. It was not a handsome picture. It was the only true one that had ever been made of him. Well, she said, I look like a man who has left something somewhere. Yes, said Beatrix Hart, you do. He rode back to Quenholme that night with the case in his breast pocket, 30 miles in the dark, because he could not have sat still in an inn. Reeve's letter reached him 9 days later, on the 1st of March, and it was 4 pages long and beautifully written, and every line of it smiled. Mr. Reeve begged to inform his Grace, with the deepest respect, that his apprentice Beatrix Hart had, on the 11th of February, in the presence of witnesses, taken a private commission and named a private price. That this was work taken within the meaning of the 12th article. That the penal sum of £200 was accordingly forfeit and now due. That Mr. Reeve, who had raised the girl from 15 and had never been repaid with anything but ingratitude, was reluctant to distrain upon a person of no substance, but that the law was the law, and that he had already laid the articles before an attorney in Barrowfield, and that his Grace would perhaps not think it impertinent if Mr. Reeve observed that the whole difficulty had arisen out of his Grace's own generosity, in a public shop, before witnesses, on a Tuesday afternoon. He was in Sheep Lane 36 hours later with the letter in his pocket, and he did the one thing he had promised to do, and it was the best day of that winter. I have come to ask you first, he said. Beatrix read the 4 pages standing up twice, and gave them back. Well, she said, he has been waiting 11 years for me to give him a reason, and you handed it to him with a bow. I said as much in the marketplace. You did. I take no pleasure in it. I know you do not. Now hear the rest. He put his hat on the table. The County Society hangs on the 4th of April in the Assembly Rooms at Barrowfield. Any work must be proposed by a member. I am a member. I have paid 11 years of subscriptions for the privilege of being bored in a good cause. I wish to propose 6 of your pictures under your own name, spelled out in full, and I have not written a word to the committee because I said I would ask you first. So I am asking. Yes or no, and either will do. She stood with her hands in the pockets of the coat and looked out of the window at the wet slates. If I hang, she said slowly, he sues me for £200 under the 13th article, which forbids exhibiting, and I have not got £200 nor any prospect of it, and a woman who cannot pay goes where anybody goes who cannot pay. You will not go there. Whatever else happens, you will not go there. I can promise that much, and it costs me nothing, which is the only kind of promise I am fit to make. Then he will find another way. He will. And you know that, and you are asking me anyway. I am asking you anyway, said Edmund, because I have spent 10 years being careful, and I am not sure it has made anybody safe. Yes or no, Miss Hart? Behind them, Mrs. Tibbet said, For the Lord's sake, girl. Beatrix Hart laughed one short, startled breath of a laugh and said, Yes, 6. I choose them, and you do not argue about which. Agreed. And no money. Not 1 shilling of yours in the frames, the carriage, the hanging fee, or anything else. If I am to be in that room, I will be in it at my own charges, and I have £4.11 saved in a tea canister since I was 19, and it will very nearly do. It will not nearly do. Then I shall paint 2 in signs in a fortnight, and it will do exactly, said Beatrix. And you may hold your tongue about it, your grace, for that is the price. The 6 were hung on the 2nd of April, in the small room at the north end, which was where the society put everything it had not decided about. Edmund came at 9 in the morning and found her up a ladder in her working apron with a mouthful of pins. She had brought them in a fish basket packed with wool. She hung them herself, at her own height, low, because, she said, from the ladder, the whole world hangs a miniature at the height of a tall man, and half of England is not a tall man. The card under each one said, in the Society's careful copperplate, Beatrix Hart, Barrowfield. He watched her read the first card. She read it for a long time. Say something, he said. I am counting, said Beatrix. 221 pictures. This is the first with my name under it. I should like to be sensible about it, and I find I am not going to be, so if you would kindly walk to the other end of the room and look at the landscapes, which are very bad, I should take it as a kindness. He walked to the other end of the room and looked at the landscapes, which were very bad. They brought Mrs. Tibbet in the afternoon, in a chair, up 11 steps, protesting the whole way that she had no business in an exhibition room, and then sat her on a bench in front of the 6 and described them to her one at a time. The sea captain, said Beatrix. You remember him, the one who would not take his hat off. He had a voice like a gate. He is on the left at the end. And then the boy from the Haworth Road, the one with the harelip. I painted it as it is. You would, said Mrs. Tibbet. And then the old woman from the toll house, who is not paid for and never will be, and who is in a room full of gentry this afternoon, whether they like it or not. The old woman's hands moved on the top of her stick. And the Duke's. The Duke's is not here, said Beatrix. It is his. It is in my breast pocket, said Edmund, as it happens. And he took it out and put it into Mrs. Tibbet's hand, and she went over it with her thumbs, the case, the rim, the little pin at the top, the way she went over everything. Well, she said at last, there is a great deal of jaw. There is, said Edmund. And is it like him, girl? It is exactly like him, said Beatrix Hart. There was a moment then, in a cold public room smelling of size and New Deal, with a blind woman between them holding his face in her hands. When Edmund Quenholme came within 1 word of saying the whole of it, the drawer, the green room, the hair, the 10 years, Beatrix had turned to look at him and had not turned away again. The Society's porter came in and said, Beg pardon, your grace. There is a gentleman below asking for you very particular, a Mr. Reeve. He says it is a private matter, and he says to tell you it concerns the young person. Edmund should have said, Then he may say it upstairs in front of her. That is the whole of what he should have said, and it was 7 words, and he has had a great many years to consider them. What he said was, Tell him I will come down. Reeve was waiting in the small parlor of the Crown across the yard, with a bottle he had ordered on the Duke's account, and a leather case on the table, and he rose and bowed like a man greeting an old friend. "Your Grace, I shall be brief, because you are a busy gentleman and I am a plain one." He turned the case round. "I do not want the 200 pounds. I never did. I want an end to a thing that has become uncomfortable in a small town where I have my living to get." "Go on." "Discharge her articles. 200 pounds, the same sum, paid to me instead of by her, and the term is cancelled, the penalty falls away, the attorney is called off, and Miss Hart may sign, exhibit, teach, and starve in whatever manner she pleases from the day the ink is dry." He spread his hands. "I have had the deed drawn. It wants only 2 signatures." Edmund read it. It was 1 sheet and short, and the operative part was exactly what Reeve said it was. It was the recital at the top that he read twice. "Whereas the said Beatrix Hart was bound apprentice to the said Talbot Reeve, by articles dated the 9th of June, and whereas all works whatsoever executed by her during the term thereof are and remain the sole property of the said Talbot Reeve, and whereas the parties are minded to determine the said articles." "This clause is unnecessary," he said. "It is a recital, Your Grace. It recites what is already the law of the articles. Any attorney in England will tell you the same." Reeve's face was perfectly open. "But if it offends you, we shall leave the whole thing alone and let it go to the court in the ordinary way, and she may find 200 pounds where she can. I am content either way. I have waited 11 years. I can wait a summer." The window looked out on the assembly rooms across the yard. There was a light on in the small room at the north end, and a woman's shadow moving on the ceiling, still hanging pictures at 4:30. "Ask her first." "Give me the pen," said the Duke of Quenholme. The exhibition opened on the 4th of April at noon, and by 1 o'clock there were 200 people in the assembly rooms at Barrowfield, and the small room at the north end was the only room anybody was standing in. They stood 4 deep in front of 6 miniatures the size of playing cards. Edmund heard a woman say of the Toll House portrait, "But she is exactly like my mother," in the voice of somebody who has been ambushed. He should have let the day alone. It was going perfectly well without him. At 1:30, he went up on the little dais at the end of the room, where the president gave the annual address to 11 people and a dog, and he said that he had an announcement which he hoped would give pleasure. He said that Miss Beatrix Hart of Barrowfield, whose work the county had been buying for 12 years under another man's name, was from this day forward a free woman, that her articles had been discharged that Tuesday afternoon, and that the sum had been paid, and the matter was at an end. The room did what rooms do. Somebody said, "Hear him." Somebody clapped. Edmund Quenholme looked for her over their heads, and found her at the back by the door with her hands at her sides, not clapping, not smiling, watching him with an expression he could not read at all, and he thought, "She is overcome." She was not overcome. She was watching Talbot Reeve come up the room. "Your Grace is too modest," said Reeve, arriving at the dais, beaming, with his hat under his arm and the leather case in his hand. "He has not told you the half. Mr. President, gentlemen, I ask leave to read 1 sentence of the deed His Grace signed, since he has been so good as to mention it." And he read the recital aloud, slowly, in a fine carrying voice, to 200 people. "Whereas all works whatsoever executed by her during the term thereof are and remain the sole property of the said Talbot Reeve." He let it sit. "The term ran," he said pleasantly, "from the 9th of June, 11 years since, to Tuesday last at 4:30. These 6 pictures were painted in the 4th, 7th, and 9th years of it. They are, upon the words of the deed, and by the signature of His Grace the Duke of Quenholme, my property, and I am sure no gentleman in this room would ask the committee to hang another man's goods under a stranger's name. He turned to the secretary's table, at which he himself usually sat. 6 correction slips, if you please. The catalogue is in error. T. Reeve of the marketplace. There was a silence of a particular kind, the kind that comes when a room understands something all at once, and would rather it had not. The president said something about the propriety of the thing. The oldest member of the hanging committee, a Mr. Bolai of 81, said loudly that it was a disgrace and was not attended to. A boy was sent for paste. And the 6 cards that said Beatrix Hart, Barrowfield were pasted over, one by one, in front of 200 people, at 1:45 on the 4th of April, while the Duke of Quenholme stood on the dais and understood, about 4 seconds too late for it to be of any use to anybody, what he had signed. "Oh, and there is this," said Reeve at his elbow, and his voice was not raised at all now. It was for the 2 of them. "The little thing in your Grace's breast pocket with the name on the back plate, painted in February, within the term. That is mine as well, and I shall not ask for it because I am not a barbarian, but it is mine. You gave it to me, sir. You bought her freedom with everything she ever made." Beatrix Hart came up the room. The crowd made way for her the way crowds do, without deciding to. She went past the dais without looking at Edmund at all, and she took the 6 miniatures off the wall herself, one at a time, unhurried, going up on her toes for the top 2, and she set them in a row along the secretary's table. "They are yours by your paper," she said to Reeve. "Take them, and when you get them home, Mr. Reeve, do not open the cases." Then she turned round and looked at the room. "I painted every one of these," she said. "I am not going to argue about it here, because a room is not a court and a crowd is not a judge, and I do not intend to spend the rest of my life saying so at the top of my voice. You will hear from me by other means." She walked out. She did not slam the door either. Edmund found her in the yard of the Crown. He had 10 sentences, and he got as far as 3. "I will make it right. I will buy them back at any figure he likes to name, and the deed can be." "Do not. Miss Hart." "You went down the stairs," said Beatrix. "That is all, that is the whole of it. He asked for you privately and you went, and you sat in a parlor with a man who has robbed me for 12 years, and you signed a paper about my life with my name in it, and I was 90 feet away up a flight of stairs on a ladder." Her voice did not rise. That was the terrible part. "I asked you for one thing in the world. One. Ask me first. I was trying to make you free." "You were trying to be the man who made me free," she said, "and it is not the same, and today it cost me everything I have made since I was 15. She pulled the man's coat straight. "Go home, your Grace. Do not send money. If money comes I shall return it, and returning things costs me the postage, which I have not got." What Beatrix Hart did between the 4th of April and the 12th of May, she did entirely alone, and the county talked of nothing else for a year. Reeve gave Mrs. Tibbet notice of the shop room on the Friday. The 2 of them moved on the Monday to 2 rooms over a saddler's in Fish Street, and Beatrix carried the paint box and the fish basket herself, and hired a barrow for the rest. She painted 11 in signs in 3 weeks, and a brewer's dray, and the name board of a school in the open in the street, where anybody might stand and watch her do it, and a good many people did. And every night she sat up over a book. It was a stiff-backed day book, 4 inches by 6, and she had kept it since she was 15 years old because Reeve had once accused her of idling and she had determined that it should never be said twice. Every picture. The date begun, the date finished, the hours, the sitter, the price the shop got, the 11 shillings she got, and in the margin of each entry in pencil, no bigger than a thumbnail, a tiny sketch of the face. 221 entries. On the 9th of May, she walked into the printers in Bridge Street and laid £4 11 shillings on the counter, the tea canister, every coin of it, and the signed money on top, and ordered 300 handbills. They went up on the 12th. On the Wool Hall, on the Crown, on the Bell at Halfworth, 11 miles off, on the church board at 3 parishes, in the window of every shop in Barrowfield that would take one and several that took one, and then thought better of it. 221 pictures. A list, by date and by sitter, of the works sold in the market placed these 12 years under the name of T. Reeve, together with the hand that painted them. Every case bears a hair, scratched inside the brass rim under the pad, where the seller never looks. Open your own picture and see. And at the foot of it, the undersigned will attend at the Assembly Rooms, Barrowfield, on Tuesday the 26th day of May, at 11 in the forenoon, and will paint the likeness of any subscriber who presents himself in 2 hours in the open room before witnesses. Mr. Reeve is invited to attend and do the same. The county may then judge whose hand it is. Beatrix Hart. Colby brought one up to the house at Quenholme on the 14th. Damp from the wall, he had peeled it off. "I thought your grace had best see it," he said, "before somebody else tells you." Edmund read the challenge first. Then he began at the top of the list in the second column, because it was arranged by year, and he found the 4th year and the March of it. Entry 41. 4th year, March the 3rd, 2 hours and a half. An officer going out to his regiment in the green room over the shop would not sit still and made me laugh twice. Talked the whole time of a brother who thinks him a fool and is wrong about it. Wanted a second thing to leave behind and had no more money, so I gave him the sketch of his hand. Shop had 6 guineas. I had 11 shillings. Edmund Quenholme read it standing at his own library window with the damp handbill in both hands. And then he read it again. And then he sat down on the window seat because his legs had stopped attending. He got the traveling box out of the bottom drawer. He had lifted the pad in January and seen the hair and shut the case up again with his hands shaking, and had not gone further, because there is only so much a man will do to a thing he has left of his brother. Now he took it wholly to pieces on the leather top of his desk in the light of 4 candles. Rim, glass, ivory, card, pad, and behind the card, folded twice to the size of a postage stamp, and gone the color of tea, a scrap of cartridge paper. He opened it out. A young man's hand in pencil, 3 inches long. Knuckles, the tendon standing up, a cuff button undone. Nothing else on the paper but 4 words in a corner in a small upright hand, for his brother, B.H. Jasper had carried it out to the ship and packed it in the case, and never said a word about it, because Jasper had been 23, and had thought there would be a great deal of time to say things in. The Duke of Quenholme sat in his library until the candles were stubs. He had owned 2 of her pictures since January and had never told her. He had owned the second one for 10 years, the only likeness of his brother's face that existed anywhere on the earth, the thing he would have gone into a burning house for, and it had been made in a back room over a shop by a girl of 17 who was paid 11 shillings and told not to sign it. And in April, on a dais, in front of 200 people, he had put his own name to a paper saying that everything she had ever painted belonged to Talbot Reeve. He did 4 things in the next 9 days, and he was careful, for once in his life, about the order of them. He did not send money. First, he went to his own attorney in the county town and asked whether the deed could be undone, and was told, in the flat voice attorneys keep for gentlemen who sign things in parlors, that it could not, that a recital signed by a party of full age and sound mind was evidence against him and against nobody else in the world. and that his grace had, in effect, given away another person's property with his eyes open, which was not a crime, only a folly, and folly had no remedy. "Then what is my paper worth?" said Edmund. "As a defense to Mr. Reeve, a great deal. As evidence for him, nothing at all, your grace. You cannot make a fact by writing it down. You can only make a difficulty." Second, he wrote to the county paper over his own name, 7 lines, and paid to have it set on the front sheet. "I signed a deed on the 31st of March reciting that all works painted by Miss Beatrix Hart during her apprenticeship are the property of Mr. Talbot Reeve. I signed it without her knowledge and without asking her. The recital is false, and I knew nothing of the matter when I put my name to it. I ask no sympathy. I ask only that no person in this county should hereafter say that Miss Hart's claim rests upon a duke's charity, because it does not, and never did, and my only part in it has been to do her harm. Quenholme. Third, he resigned his membership of the county society, on the ground that he had brought a matter of business into it, and asked that his 11 years of subscriptions be applied to the room's coals. Fourth and last, and only when the other 3 were done, he rode to Barrowfield and stood in Fish Street outside a saddler's shop, while a woman on a stool finished the O in the name board of a bootmaker. She saw him. She went on with the O. "I have not come to help," said Edmund. "That will be a novelty. I have come to ask you first." Beatrix Hart wiped her brush and came down off the stool, and stood in the street with the sun on the wet paint behind her. He put the case in her hand. "Entry 41, he said. He watched her open it. He watched her turn it to the light, and then turn it over, and then go quite still, and put 2 fingers to her mouth. "The green room," she said. "He had a shaving cut on his jaw, and I left it in, and he was pleased about it." She looked up. "This is your brother." "That is my brother." "You have had this the whole time. In January, in February, when I asked you if you had a likeness, and you sat in that chair and said neither of them is him." Her voice had gone thin. "Your Grace." "I know. You let me sit at a window for 6 sittings, and tell you about a hare." "I know," said Edmund. "I could not say it. I have not opened that case in front of another living soul in 10 years, and I told myself I would say it on the next day, and then on the next, and then it was the 4th of April, and it was too late to say anything at all." He took his hat off, which he had not meant to do. "I am not asking you to forgive it. I am asking you a question, and then I will go. On Tuesday, in the room, Mr. Beaulieu of the committee is 81, and has cleaned pictures for 60 years. And he says that Reeve's signature on the corner of these ivories sits on top of the varnish, and that a knife will lift it off in front of a room without touching what is under it, if the hand is steady." "It will lift off," said Beatrix. "He signed them dry in a hurry with a mastic he mixed himself. It has been the one comfort of my life. Then I ask your leave to bring this one to the Assembly Rooms on Tuesday, and to put it into Mr. Beaulieu's hands, and let him take a knife to it in front of the county." She stared at him. "That is your brother's face." "It is the only one there is." "If his hand slips—" "Then it is gone," said Edmund, "and I shall have paid something at last, instead of buying something and calling it a payment. It is your case, madam. Your hair is in it. I will not carry it through that door unless you tell me to, and if you tell me not to, I shall put it back in the drawer and never mention it again." Beatrix Hart looked down at the small oval in her palm for a long time. "You may bring it," she said at last, "on 2 conditions. You will hand it to Mr. Beaulieu and sit down, and you will not speak for me, not one word, not to the room, not to Reeve, not if they laugh at me. If I am to be believed, it will be because of the picture I paint on Tuesday, and not because a duke stood up. She closed his fingers over the case. And afterwards, whatever comes of it, you will not offer me a house, or an allowance, or a commission out of pity, because I would rather paint in signs for 40 years, and I am perfectly capable of it, and I would say no, and it would end us. Agreed, both. Then I shall see you at 11, said Beatrix Hart, and went back up the stool to her O. The 26th of May was hot, and by 10:30 there was not a place to stand in the assembly rooms at Barrowfield. They had come from 3 counties. They had come with their pictures in their pockets, old sea captains, and dead wives and boys grown up and gone, in oval cases, in leather cases, sewn into linen, because 300 handbills had told them to open their own and look, and half of England cannot resist being told to open its own and look. At 11 exactly Beatrix Hart walked to the table at the top of the room, set down a fish basket, took out a paint box no bigger than a snuff box, and said, "Who will sit?" And at 4 minutes past, the door at the far end opened, and Talbot Reeve came in with his attorney. "My client attends," said the attorney, "under protest, and denies the jurisdiction of a public room." "There is no jurisdiction," said Beatrix Hart. "There is a table, a chair, and 2 hours. Who will sit?" Nobody moved. 200 people in their best clothes discovered an interest in the ceiling, because it is one thing to read a handbill on a wall and quite another to walk up the length of a room in front of the county. Then a stick went tap on the boards at the end of the 3rd bench. "I will sit," said Mrs. Tibbet. "Somebody give me an arm, and do not steer me as though I were a barrow. Take my elbow and say how many steps." 11 steps. They set her in the chair by the window with the light on her left, and she put her hands one over the other on the head of her stick, and lifted her chin at the room in general, and Beatrix said, "You will fidget." "I shall not." "You always fidget." "Paint faster, then," said Mrs. Tibbet. She painted for 2 hours in front of 200 people. Nobody left. Somewhere in the 2nd hour, the room stopped being a crowd and became a congregation, and the only sounds in the assembly rooms at Barrowfield were a brush going into water, a stick creaking, and once, from the back, a man blowing his nose like a trumpet. At 1:10 she stood up and turned the board round, and there was an old woman in black on an ivory the size of a playing card. The set of the mouth, the hands on the stick, the particular tilt of a head that has learned to listen instead of look, and every year of 70 in the face, and not one of them apologized for. Mr. Beaulieu of the hanging committee got up in the middle of the room and said, "Well, that is the end of that," and sat down again. The president, who had spent 6 weeks trying not to be in this position, said, "Mr. Reeve, the challenge lies open. 2 hours, sir, at the same table." "My client is not a performing animal," said the attorney. "Nobody supposes he is an animal of any kind," said Mr. Beaulieu, "but he has taken 6 guineas of my money, and I should like to see him hold a brush." And the room made a noise that Talbot Reeve would hear in his sleep for the rest of his life. He did not sit. He stood up instead and began upon the deed, and the articles, and his rights, and his good name, and 40 years in the market-place, and the ingratitude of a girl he had fed at his own table. And while he was talking, all over the assembly rooms, people were quietly getting little cases out of their pockets. They opened them the way the handbill said, "Thumbnail under the rim, lift the pad." A woman in the 2nd row said, "There is a hair in my mother." A farmer said, "Here's one." And here. It went through that room like water going through sand. 40, 50, 60 cases, opened on knees and hat brims and window sills, and in every single one of them, scratched in the brass where the cellar never looks, a hair sitting up. When it had gone quiet again, the Duke of Quenholme stood up. He said not one word. He walked to the table, put a small oval case into Mr. Beaulieu's hands, and went back and sat down, and folded his arms so that nobody should see what they were doing. Mr. Beaulieu set his glass in his eye, signed in the corner, T. Reeve, in a red-brown, sitting proud of the varnish. He took up a knife with a blade like a wafer. "Miss Hart, is the ground beneath it dry, do you suppose?" "It was dry 10 years ago," said Beatrix. "Go on." "There is a sound a varnished knife makes on ivory. It is very small and very dry, and it went across that silent room like a slate breaking, and Edmund Quenholme sat with his arms folded and his eyes on the floor and listened to a knife go across his brother's face. 4 strokes 5. "It is off," said Mr. Beaulieu. He held the little thing up between finger and thumb and turned slowly round with it so that the room could see. And where the name had been there was clean ivory, and in the ground at the very edge, put down in a wet gray underpaint before ever the face was begun, a hair sitting up with its ears back. "That is drawn in the ground," said Mr. Beaulieu to the room, in the voice of a man who has waited 81 years to be useful. "It was there before the first stroke of the picture. Whoever painted this began by drawing a hair, and any man who tells you he laid this on afterwards is asking you to believe that a fellow put his signature down before he knew what he was going to paint." He handed it back to Beatrix. "Ma'am, that is yours, and it is the best thing in this county." The society expelled Talbot Reeve that evening by a show of hands, with 2 against. His shop was sold in September, and he went to a cousin in the eastern counties, and was not heard of in Barrowfield again. The 6 miniatures were sold with the stock, and the subscribers bought them in a body for £11, and presented them to the Assembly Rooms, where they hang today in the large room with cards under them, and the cards say what they say. Nobody in Barrowfield ever bought a picture again without opening the case first, which the casemaker said was very good for trade. Beatrix Hart took the front room over the saddlers in Fish Street that June, and in the spring she took a shop of her own in Bridge Street with a bow window, and had the board painted herself. B. Hart, miniature painter, and under the letters a hair sitting up. Mrs. Tibbet had the warm room at the back, and kept the appointment book in her head, and would tell a duke to wait if a farmer's wife had come first, and did, more than once, with relish. Edmund sat to her again that autumn properly in her own shop, at her own price, with his name written in the book behind a curate and a farmer's wife, and no gold laid out on any counter. He was a better sitter the second time. He had learned to be still. He asked her in October, with the shutters half up and the smell of varnish everywhere, and he did it the only way he was ever going to be allowed to do it. He asked her first, and then he waited, and did not fill the silence with anything. "I shall not stop," said Beatrix. "Not for a house, not for a title, not for a room full of your relations. My name stays on my work and my board stays over that door, and if the county wishes to be scandalized, the county has had a great deal of practice this year. I have not asked you to stop. You will be asked to ask me, by everyone, for years." "Then they will be disappointed for years," said Edmund. "Beatrix, I have spent 1 winter and 1 spring learning what it costs when I decide things about you in rooms you are not standing in. I am slow, but I am not slow twice." They were married in the April following, at the parish church in Barrowfield, very early, with 11 people in the pews and a blind woman on the bride's arm. "You will walk me," said Mrs. Tibbet, "and I will walk you, and neither of us shall fall down." And afterwards there was ham and a seed cake in the room over the saddlers, and the bootmaker's board was still wet in the street outside. She painted all her life. She painted the toll house woman a second time for nothing, and delivered it herself. She took 2 pupils, both girls, both from families that could not have paid Reeves' price for a frame, and she taught them the trade entire, including the part about the daybook, and including the part about the mark inside the case, which she told them they might keep if they liked, since a woman never knows. And in the long gallery at Quenholme, between 2 portraits in gilt frames that cost 100 guineas apiece and caught the correct number of features, there hangs a very small oval on a mount of green silk. Beside it in a plain frame is a pencil drawing of a young man's hand, 3 inches long, with 4 words in the corner. And on the card beneath them both, in a small upright hand, painted at Barrowfield the 3rd of March by Beatrix Hart, aged 17, in 2 hours and a half for 11 shillings. The best thing in this house. Do not clean it. Do not move it. Ask her first.